Now I would invite Shri Kuntal Joshi, and he's going to give a talk. His talk is going to be called "The Voice of Animal Resounds at the Top of the World." A little bit about Kuntal. He's a neo-celebrity of the vegan community. Recently, he became the first vegan to have conquered the highest peak on earth, Mount Everest. Swelling the chests of millions with pride, including all of us in this room, the 34-year-old vegan's actions certainly speak louder than words. After non-verbally hollering the message of animal rights from top of the world, Kuntal's journey has redefined the history of veganism, inspiring others to follow suit. Know what went behind breaking yet another myth about veganism and conquering the dream to climb the Herculean Everest. Ladies and gentlemen, Kuntal.
I'm just going to start with my vegan story first. You know, I was born in a vegetarian family, so by default I was a vegetarian. But when I moved to the United States in 2001, one of my roommates was an ethical vegetarian. And so he started questioning a lot of choices that I was making. You know, he asked me questions like, why are you eating eggs? You know, why are you wearing leather? Why are you using wool? A lot of these kind of questions. I said, what's the problem? And he started sharing a lot of information about the leather, dairy, and egg industry with me. And at that point, I actually made a connection that milk is actually worse than meat, if not meat. And so, you know, the kind of repulsive thing that, you know, would happen to me when I would see meat, that started happening to me when I started seeing milk. And that is when I decided that the only way to go forward would be to turn vegan. So, you know, that's when I turned vegan. But, you know, I'm going to talk a little bit about Everest here, since that's what I'm, you know, here to talk about. You know, Everest, of course, all of you know, is the tallest mountain in the world. But at the same time, on the top of Everest, there's only 1/3 of oxygen pressure. What that essentially means is that when I'm on top of Everest, if I breathe 3 times, that is I only get the amount of oxygen that I get when I breathe 1 time at the sea level. You know, more than 300 people have died climbing Everest, and more than 1,000 people have lost their fingers and toes and several other accidents that have happened on the mountain. It's also considered one of the toughest and most challenging challenges or epitome of challenges that can be taken. And so, you know, the quintessential question that I'm always asked is, you know, why climb Everest? You know, why spend months and months in misery and, you know, spend like tens of lakhs of rupees from your pocket to do this? Why do this? You know, what I'm going to do is, I'm going to actually quote a legendary English mountaineer, George Mallory, who was one of the primary explorers of Everest. People ask me, what is the use of climbing Mount Everest? And my answer must at once be, it is of no use. There is not the slightest prospect of any gain whatsoever, and nothing will come of it. We shall not bring back a single bit of gold or silver, not a gem, nor any coal or iron. If you cannot understand that there is something in man which responds to the challenge of this mountain and goes out to meet it, that the struggle is the struggle of life itself, upward and forever upward, then you won't see why we go. What we get from this adventure is just sheer joy. And joy is, after all, the end of life. We do not live to eat and make money. We eat and make money to be able to live. That is what life means and what life is for. But let me tell you, when I decided that I wanted to climb Everest, the primary notion in the entire mountain climbing community was, you don't eat animal protein, you don't eat any animal products like dairy and cheese. How are you going to climb this mountain? Where are you going to get your protein from? Where are you going to get your calcium from? How are you going to stay warm on the mountain? On a very good day on the mountain, the temperatures are minus 40 degrees Celsius. So you can imagine what kind of challenge this is. But before I get into the challenge itself, let me share a story with you that will actually help you understand why I climb. It was February 2009. My wife Dipti and I had gone to Shimla, and the only sole goal of that trip was to see some snow. And that's why we had gone in the winters. And for the first 6 days, we saw absolutely nothing. It was just miserable. We were cold. We were not enjoying our time. And on the 7th day, a friend said, why don't you drive to this place called Narkanda and you will see a lot of snow. So of course, we drive to Narkanda and we see a lot of snow on the peaks. Our driver says that let's drive to the top of one of the peaks, and we take the drive. About half a kilometer into the drive, we run into a lot of snow, and our driver says, now you have seen the snow, just go enjoy and let's get home now. So, we go out and we spend our time in the snow, and for whatever reason, I tell my wife, why don't we go further for another 15 minutes? We have enjoyed our time here, let's go 15 minutes further. So we go a little further and we enjoy our time more. So 15 minutes becomes half an hour into an hour into 2, and about 3 hours later, we were standing on top of that peak. Here is a Gujarati boy, 110 kgs, absolutely, no background of any endurance, and he makes it to the top of this peak. And when I was standing on top of that peak, I have to tell you, that was one moment that changed my entire life. Sometimes when we are living in a 9-to-6 life, most of the times we are living either in the past or we are just worrying about the future. And when we are living in this past-future cycle, we are just forgetting that there's also a present moment that is actually constantly going on, and we are missing it. When I was standing on top of that peak, all the past, all the future, all of that just melted away, and only present came into focus. It was so crazy that I could actually hear my heart beat, like, doop, doop. It was just spectacular, as a feeling. And when I, on that mountain felt that, I told myself that, for the rest of my life, I'm actually going to chase this feeling. And that is when I decided that, I'm going to climb Mount Everest. But just as I was mentioning that, a lot of mountain climbing community did not, take this, well. The first expedition I went on, I struggled quite a bit with my food. But anyways, to get to, climb Mount Everest, you have to have a top of the world mind and a top of the world body. And for next 5 years, because I was 110 kgs and I had no background in climbing or anything, I decided that I'm going to put in that time, train myself and get ready. Let me tell you that I used to be a junk food vegan, so I used to eat, everything like pizza, pav vada, pav bhaji, whatever, is available. I used to eat everything. But when I decided to climb Mount Everest, I decided that, I had to change. And so I started eating very healthy vegan food. And this vegan food has helped me immensely in training, and it has helped me immensely in recovering from excruciating workouts that, fueled my climb to the top of the world. So let me tell you a little bit about my journey. In 2014, I made my first attempt to climb Mount Everest. And I distinctly remember that day. It was April 18th, and we were just up in the morning, and on 6:45, we heard a lot of chatter on the radio, and we got a news that 16 Sherpa guides had died in a single accident. At that point, this was the single largest accident on the mountain. I remember the moment when our Sherpa team of 9 members had just missed this accident by 5 minutes. And they had come down, and the Sirdar Sherpa, who is the expedition leader, he came to me and he cried on my shoulders. And the only question he asked was, what about my wife? What about my parents? And in that moment, I thought, the mountain doesn't seem to be safe. Let's just go home. I can wait one inconsequential year to come back and climb this again. So I came back and I, trained harder. I thought, Mount Everest wants me to train harder and come back. So I trained harder for 1 year and I came back in 2015. And, in 2015, everything was going well. There are stages in which you climb Everest, and we had finished the first stage. We were all sitting in the dining tent, and all of us had gathered, just like all of us have gathered here. We were about 15, 20 of us in the dining tent, and the tent poles actually started shaking. Now, I have lived in California for quite a few years, and so I know what a small earthquake also looks like. or feels like. So I was pretty certain that this was an earthquake. And of course, within 2 or 3 seconds, the poles started shaking harder. So we all came out and we were all standing out. Now I'm going to ask for some imagination here. Imagine that you are standing on a giant swing, which is swaying from one side to the next. This is what was happening to us when we were standing on this glacier. It was swaying from one side to the next. We were so terrified that we thought for a moment that the ground is going to open up and just swallow us all. Most people think that earthquakes go on for 10-15 seconds. This one lasted for 80 seconds. And once the earthquake, finished, we were all standing there and, we didn't know what was going to happen next. And in that moment, we heard a loud boom, almost like that somewhere there was a bomb blast that had happened. And, the voice was coming from Everest side. Now, we couldn't see anything that day because there was a low cloud that had set in at the base camp. So we really couldn't see Everest, or we really couldn't see any peaks. And in that moment, something very unusual happened. There were these people who were all running towards Everest. And so I told myself, okay, if the danger is Everest, why would people run towards Everest? This does not make any sense. And that's when we realized that danger was actually behind us. And when we turned around, I was facing with this gigantic block of snow and ice, coming towards me at an unreal speed. Imagine from the left of the sky to the right of the sky, wherever you could see, there was only this gigantic block of snow and ice. A lot of people ask me what I felt during that time. And let me tell you that I didn't think that I was going to die. I was 100% certain that I was going to die. So, when I was standing there, another feeling that came was a feeling of intense sadness. Sadness that I'm going to end up dying this way, and I really wanted to cry out loud at that moment. But when things like this happen, there's a little bit of panic, and you just do whatever comes to your mind. And so there were 3 of us, and all 3 of us ran and hid behind a tent. So this is myself, a German climber, and a Japanese climber. Yeah, I mean, we were not inside the tent, we were behind the tent. That's how smart we were, you can imagine. So we were behind the tent, and the avalanche came and hit us really hard. For the first 10 seconds, of course, it was a lot of panic, thinking that I'm going to be buried under a lot of snow and possibly end up dying. But that did not happen. So I thought, okay, I survived the earthquake. Seems like I'm also going to survive the avalanche. And the next thing that happened was I just could not breathe. I would do this, and nothing would come in. I would do it again, and nothing would come in. It's as if someone had taken a plastic bag and was choking me. So I couldn't realize what was going on. At that time, the German climber next to me opened his jacket and told me that you can come inside my jacket and breathe. Now, to explain to you guys, there were still ambient pockets of air inside this person's jacket, and I was able to go inside these ambient pockets of air, breathe, come out, struggle, go in, come out. So for next 2-3 minutes, as the avalanche, passed over us, I was doing this. And that is, how I saved my life. Or that is how the German climber saved my life. Imagine it's such a distress situation, it's such a dire situation, and he still had the presence of mind to, save me. And the Japanese climber next to him, he also saved him by doing the same thing. And he himself was doing the same thing, like he would open the jacket, and he would go in and he would breathe. So, just spectacular thinking. And come to think of it, he is only 22 years old. So, anyways, what we did after the avalanche is, first we, took a head count of the entire team. Everyone in the team was fine. So we took a high ground, and, just let me explain a bit about the Everest Base Camp itself. The Everest Base Camp is a 2 kilometers long glacier, and there are more than 1,000 people living on this moving glacier at a time. So it's almost like a hustling, bustling city. And when we took the high ground, we saw that the entire base camp had been devastated. It was almost like flat ground. We knew it was a serious accident. So we quickly ran to the medical tent, and of course there were dead bodies that were coming in, and there were injured people coming in. And one lady I particularly remember, when she walked in, half of her face was just missing. It was just skin and bones. We saw a lot of such kind of injuries. Now let me tell you what exactly had happened. Behind us, or opposite of Everest, there is a mountain called Pumori. And from top of Pumori, there was a block of snow and ice the size of a cricket stadium that had actually dislodged due to the earthquake. And that had fallen down. And when it impacted with the ground, there was a big shock wave that actually, ripped the base camp apart. And that's how most people ended up dying at the base camp. Now, the reason we were hearing the sound from the Everest was when this block of snow and ice impacted with the ground, the noise was echoing from the Everest side. And that is why we were confused that, the sound is coming from Everest. Anyways, when this earthquake happened, there were more than 10,000 people that died in Nepal and more than 500,000 people that got displaced from their homes. It was a huge humanitarian crisis. And for me, it was important that, the Sherpas be with their family in the time of need and that we cancel our expedition and go home. So I was the expedition leader for 2015 expedition, and we canceled our expedition and we all came home. Now, when I came home, a lot of people who at first told me that this is an impossible dream, all of them returned. They said, we had told you, you are not going to be able to climb this mountain. There are two distinct scenarios or two distinct things that I would like to share. One person came and told me, because you don't believe in God, you will never make it to the top of the world. And second person came and told me that every time you go to Nepal, people die there. Stop going to Nepal. So imagine that, you have put in your blood and heart and soul into this project, and when someone comes and tell you such things, it's not, it's not the best. But anyways, Everest was my dream. Everest was my passion. And I was absolutely not giving up on my dream or passion. All you awesome folks from animal rights movement are here, and you would not give up on that animal, right? Absolutely not. And that is, what, Everest was my baby. Everest was my project. I was not giving up on Everest. So, I said to myself, I'm going to train one more year, and I'm going to go climb this mountain. So I trained another year, and in, early this year, I made it to the mountain again. I'm going to take, a couple of minutes and just explain you how mountain climbing happens in stages. First, you walk to the base camp, which is about 10 days. Then you spend about 30 days acclimatizing your body or adjusting your body to various altitudes on the mountain. And once you have done this, you are actually ready to climb the mountain in one shot. So a typical Everest expedition is about 65 days and costs, roughly about upwards of 30,000 US dollars or about, 20 to 23 lakh rupees. Now, we were at the base camp and we had finished all the stages and we were on the final summit push. I still remember, I was about 2 hours away from the summit and I was one of the vegans who was on the mountain. There were 3 vegans on the mountain. I was one. There was another vegan. Her name is Paula Leonard. She is from Alaska and she has been a vegan for more than about 30 years. And she has, by the way, there's an endeavor called the 7 Summits, where you climb 7 highest mountains in each continent. When she did Everest, she has done 6 summits already. She is only 1 summit away from achieving her 7 summits dream. Now, Paula was, sitting somewhere, and I think she was a bit, under the weather. And I was passing by her. And, of course, I, right away realized she was Paula because she had removed her oxygen mask, and, she was there. I could see her face. And, I have not told this story to anyone, and because this is an animal rights conference, I think I can say it. I got to Paula and I told her, please remember the cause you are climbing for. Because both of us were climbing for the animals, for the voiceless. And, that was big thing, for us. So I told her, that please remember this and, please use this, as a source of inspiration to, get to the top. I, of course, passed her and, my memory of that incident is, fading away day by day. But I think when I was telling that to Paula, I was also telling that to myself. Don't forget the animals. Don't forget the animals, So I was about 20 meters away from standing on top of the world. And a lot of people ask me, I've now given more than 40 talks. And people always ask me, what were you feeling on top of the world? And I have to tell you, the first feeling was a feeling of intense relief. Relief that Everest was out of my life. It has been extremely 8 hard years. Uh, Let me tell you that I have not had any other life other than Everest. I sleep, breathe, drink, eat Everest. That is my life. Absolutely my life. Nandita, who's, the pioneer in vegan outreach in India and vegan everything in India, she's one of my biggest inspirations. And I have also done some work with her, and every time she would call me, I would say, Nandita, look, I'm training for Everest. And Nandita, now that I'm done it, I'm going to hope that I can do something more for you now. I was just 20 meters away, and next thing after relief was, I just broke down. I completely broke down, and the next 10, 15 steps that I took to the top of the world, I just cried, and I cried, and I cried louder. I got to the top, and I wanted to do two things primarily. I had a vegan flag with me, so I wanted to plant that on top of the world. I wanted to shout out from the top of the world, where do I get my protein from? Now everyone has that answer. And of course, the biggest thing I wanted to do is, I wanted to call my dad. Most of you here don't know, but my dad is actually a Lewy body dementia patient, and he has been one for last 15 years. Today he's completely bedridden, and he does not recognize who I am. He does not recognize that I'm his son. When I was there, I thought, if I make a phone call to him and tell him that I'm on top of the world, he would not understand what Everest is. But I'm sure he would at least get a feeling that his son has, achieved the biggest dream of his life. And even if that gave a smile to him or an emotion in him, that was a huge thing for me. So, that was important. I had a satellite phone. I made him the phone call, and I told him that. And the next thing was, of course, I wanted to spend 5 minutes on top of the world, completely left alone. And thankfully, my Sherpa Mingma Tenji gave me those 5 minutes. And I have to tell you that the view from the top of the world is absolutely magical. It is beyond all belief. I can stand here, show you thousands of photos, tell you thousands of things, but what I felt there for those 5 minutes, I could do anything to get there back again and, experience those 5 minutes. But let me tell you that, getting to the top is great. But I think enjoying the journey, those 8 years is where I actually transformed myself as a person. So I think it's important to enjoy the journey as well as you get to the top. The last thing that I had to do was to get back down safely. 7 people had already died on the mountain. Several people had lost their fingers and toes, and I did not want to lose that because that would be really bad publicity for the vegan cause. And I didn't want that to happen. For the next 2 days, I focused, and I came back down safely. I'm here in front of you, no fingers lost, no toes lost, all fine, everything fine. And before I end, my thing, I just wanted to do 2 things. In any journey, there are, of course, the getting to the top, the journey itself is very important. But, it's also the people who you take this journey with are important. And I wanted to acknowledge those people. First up, the German climber next to me, his name is Jost Kabusch. I truly think that Jost gave me a rebirth that day when he saved my life. Second is, of course, my mother, Bharti, and my wife, Dipti. Without their support and without they have been there with me every moment. And without them, I would not have made it to the top. It was impossible to make it to the top without them. And last but not the least, the Sherpa people, especially my Sherpa, Mingma Tenji Sherpa and his team. Sherpas do all the work on the mountain. They fix the ropes, they take our loads, they cook food for us, they do everything for us. But in the end, people only see us. Kuntal Joysher summited Mount Everest. They don't see who summited that. Without Mingma Tenji Sherpa, I would not have made it to the top. So, please a round of applause for the awesome Sherpas. And the last thing, I want to get back to the quintessential question again. Why climb? Why climb? I can write down 1,000 reasons right now why I climb. But if I have to say it in one reason, I think that life truly, truly, truly begins outside the comfort zone. Life truly is adventure, and I find that in climbing. A lot of people think adventure is like flying off planes and dangling off rock cliffs. No, that's not adventure. You can find adventure in day-to-day things. You can find adventure in animal rights. You can find adventure in whatever you do. So I think life is an adventure, and for me, climbing is adventure, and for me, climbing is life. And final last thing before I finish. On 20th November, we are having a vegan festival, the first vegan festival of Mumbai. It's called the Ahimsa Fest, and all of you folks are invited to this festival. And by the way, that is how top of the world looks like. That is the view from the top of the world. And if you see far in the distance, that's India. That is Kanchenjunga in the distance. So, as I said, the view from top of the world is absolutely spectacular and absolutely magical. If we have some time, I can take some questions, if anyone has any questions. Paula is very much alive. She made it to the top of the world. So on the same day, 2 vegans made it to the very top of the world. And Paula is, of course, going to finish her 7th summit, and she is going to become possibly the first vegan to finish 7 summits. And I'm rooting for her. Sorry. Okay, I will come to your question. Before, the question was whether I'm the first vegan to climb Everest. Now, there's no really good way to verify whether I'm the first vegan to climb Everest. But to be very frank, I don't care. Okay, according to a German magazine that put me on their cover, they have done their research. They have spoken to people who have claimed they have climbed as a vegan, and they have found that I am possibly the best vegan and the first vegan who has made it to the top. I don't care. I think the messenger is not important, the message is important. That's what I truly feel. But coming to your question, what did I eat? When I am training, my diet is whole foods, vegan diet, and I eat a very, very low-fat diet and a very, very high-carb diet. And, if you look at a typical Indian thali that most people eat, the vegetable is in very little quantity, the dal is in very little quantity, and there's just enormous amount of rotis and rice. Mine is a 360 degrees opposite diet. My plate is filled with 75% vegetables. I eat a very big katori of dal, and I eat possibly sometimes no roti or sometimes 1 roti. And I snack a lot on fruits. I snack a lot on seeng chana that we get from the local vendor. And I eat as far as possible. I eat all local foods, So I personally think if you are eating a very well-balanced diet, okay, higher up the mountain is a different story altogether. Once you start climbing the mountain, calories matter tremendously. When you are at Everest Base Camp, which is 18,000 feet, your body at rest is burning 4,000 calories a day. That is 2 days ka khana. When I'm climbing to the top of the world, the 20-hour round trip, I'm burning 20,000 calories. That is 1,000 calories an hour. This is 10 days worth of food. I cannot put that in a day in my body. That is impossible. So a lot of that comes out of your mental energy. But at the same time, when I'm on the mountain, I really don't care about eating healthy. I'm not suggesting that anyone eat healthy, stop eating healthy. But when I'm on the mountain, I eat anything as long as it's vegan. That is what my focus is. So if it means eating 2 packets of Oreo cookies or drinking a big bottle of Coke, I really don't care. Those are great calories for me on the mountain, and they work for me on the mountain. I eat a lot of dry fruits as well. I eat a lot of dry fruits and trail mix and a whole bunch of things. But, as you start going higher and higher, your body starts conserving oxygen to its brain and to its heart. It stops oxygen to the digestive system. And so automatically you feel like you don't want to eat anything. But in front of you, if there's something that you really enjoy eating, like your comfort food, you will actually eat it. So for me, I just took all my comfort foods, which Oreo cookies is my comfort food. So I took Oreo cookies, and before making the last push, I actually ate 5 to 6 Oreo cookies. I'm not suggesting everyone eat Oreo cookies, please. Any other questions before? We can take possibly one question. Anyone? Yeah.
So were you asked to get a particular body type before you started climbing? So were you asked to get a skinnier body or a muscular body to preserve energy?
See, on Everest, you cannot be very muscular because muscles require oxygen to function, and there's not much, muscle on oxygen on Everest. I think a leaner body has better center of gravity. So leaner body is typically better for Everest, but what we do is when I'll be training, I'll probably be about 10 kgs lighter than what I am right now. And just before I'm supposed to go to the mountain, in the last month leading up to the mountain, I will eat a lot of things and I'll put on weight. So that those extra fat and everything helps me up on the mountain. Because a lot of people lose a lot of mass from their body. My friend this year, even though he did not make it to the top, lost 40 pounds in body weight on Everest. So you just, go a little bit more heavier, and by the time you get to the last few days, you are just, losing weight like nothing. So it's a great weight loss program also, if anyone's interested. Yeah, last question. Right.
Did you as a vegan have any advantage in this whole expedition?
I was just talking to Prashant. Prashant, before, coming up here, I was not there to prove that vegan diet is superior to any other diet. All I was out there to prove is that Mount Everest and all other activities can be done on a vegan diet. I don't care about other diets, I care about vegan diet, and I have proved, and Paula has proved, and several other people in coming years are going to prove that vegan diet is very, very nutritious, and you can do anything on a vegan diet.
But you didn't have any specific advantage, right?
Yes, when you start going on high altitude, hydration and water becomes very important, but this is very different for different people. For me, I typically tend to take 3.5 to 4 liters a day, but the way you work on your hydration is you look at your pee color. If your pee color is becoming very, very dark yellow, it means you are getting dehydrated. It means you need to put in more hydration. So typically what we suggest is when you are on a high altitude expedition, your pee color has to be light yellow or transparent in color. And that's how we manage our hydration. That's the kind of training we do even before getting to Everest.
Even Djokovic has written that book on vegan, Serve to Win.
Right.
It's all about veganism. He's a vegan.
Right. Yes, so many athletes in the world, ultra athletes, so many athletes are now taking up to veganism because it's giving them that performance advantage. So, if they are proving it, Serena Williams, Djokovic, so many of them are proving. Okay, I think let's cut. We still have time if anyone has more questions. Yeah. Yes, I'll talk about my training, but your question was whether we carry oxygen. Yes, so from Camp 3, which is at about 23,000 feet, we use supplementary oxygen to climb the mountain. Typically, we would consume between Camp 3 to get to the summit and back about 5 bottles of oxygen. Each bottle is about 5 kgs. Sorry, yours was training. So I do 3 things in my training. My training is not rocket science at all. 3 things. One is cardio. When I was climbing mountains, the very first thing my mountain mentor told me is cardio, cardio, and more cardio. That is the key to success on Everest. So I do a lot of cardio, and I do the activities that I enjoy. And the activities I enjoy are stair climbing and hiking. So when I'm training, all my cardio activities are trekking and stair climbing. In the local mountains and in the buildings and in the temples, anywhere where I can find longer staircases. Second thing is strength training, and I do body weight training so that my core, my lower body, my upper body, everything is well balanced. Again, very simple, things like push-ups, pull-ups, planks, lunges, very simple exercises done with correct form and okay. Third thing is I do something called high intensity interval training. What high intensity interval training did is it helped me bring down my resting heart rate. Before I went to Everest this year, my resting heart rate was 45. A typical resting heart rate of an Indian male is 75. I was 30 beats lower. So my heart was far more efficient, and when I would go higher and higher up on the mountain, it would just be better. So these are the three things I do, and high intensity interval training is pretty much doing any exercise at a very high intensity. I mean, we can go on and on. I can connect with you offline and share with you more details. Anything else? Yeah. I have no interest in going back to Everest again. I love other mountains, and there are several other mountains that I would like to climb. There is a very big challenge in the world called climbing the 14 big mountains in the Himalaya. There are a handful of people in the planet who have completed this challenge and stayed alive after completing this challenge. So my thing is climb these 14 mountains as a vegan and stay alive. Okay, good. Yeah, thank you.